Unresolved Emotional Trauma by VMS. Now we are in part 2, the year 2000,
Part
the
2, the
negotiated
year
illusion.
2000, the
Meera and
negotiated
Raju,
illusion.
millennial marriage, choice,
Rajiv
chaos,
and Meera.
consequences. The bus proposal, the
The
bus
bus
smelled of diesel,
proposal.
wet
The bus
iron
smelled
under
of
tired
diesel,
sweat of
wet.
city already late for work. Meera stood near the window holding the rusted bar above her head, balancing carefully so that her weak leg would not betray her in the sudden jerks of the road. Morning sunlight slipped through the scratched glass and rested on her hair like quiet morning sunlight slipped through the scratched glass and rested on her hair quite approval. And she was used to years, some curious, some pitying, some calculating, but this pair of eyes was different. The man standing across the aisle looked at her not with sympathy but with a strange certainty, as though he had opened a book halfway and already knew it ending. Meera met Rajiv on a crowded city bus while she was pursuing her master's degree. She stood balancing books and ambition. He stood leaning with confidence and curiosity, 5 year older, broad shouldered, charismatic, a smile that lingered too long. The first conversation lasted 3 stops, but by the fourth stop, bus stop, he said casually but intensely, "Could you marry me?" She stared at him, half annoyed, half stunned. "What? I'm serious." She thought he was arrogant, mad, amusing. To push him away, she revealed that she believed would silence him. She lifted her pajama slightly and showed her polio attack leg. "I have this. Now are you blind?" He didn't flinch. "Do you think I can't see? I'm not blind. I'm choosing you." Something about the audacity unsettled her. Something about the certainty intrigued her. She mistook obsession for devotion. When the bus halted abruptly near the market road, he stepped closer. "Marry me." The words fell between them like a stone dropped in still water. For a moment, she thought she had heard wrong. Her fingers tightened around the metal bar. "What did you say?" His voice did not tremble. "I said marry me." Anger rose quickly, hot and humiliating. Without speaking, she lifted no, her books, revealing her intention to study, rather bothered about the lifelong companion. And the bus moved again with a violent jerk, and he did not look away. "I see perfectly," he said calmly. And in that moment, Mira felt something she would later understand at the first whisper of fate. Not love, not fear, but the uneasy sensation that a door had opened somewhere behind her, quietly locking the past inside. And the manufactured dream. Rajiv was working at the reception desk of the Hotel Ambassador Pallava. It is a star hotel in Chennai. He had attempted 10th grade more than 5 times, failed each time, lastly somehow cleared, I believe. And his family was drowning in debt, and some days food was uncertain, but he carried himself like a royalty. Charm with his degree, confidence was his inheritance, manipulation was his instinct. For 5 months, he curated an illusion, stories of business prospects, property plans, and future expansion. Mira believed she had found a man who saw beyond her physical limitation, and what she had found was a strategist. Then came the truth. He was diagnosed with neuromuscular dystrophy after 5 months, a degenerative condition. She was panicked, not because of illness alone, but because she sensed deception. When she hesitated, he turned cold. "If you leave me now, I will destroy you. I will not let you marry anyone else." Love became coercion, and conversations became fights. Every day was a battlefield. The house of vampires. Meeting his family felt like stepping into a courtroom, and where she was already guilty. His mother's first question, "How much gold will you bring?" His siblings circled like silent auditors, and no warmth, no welcome, only calculation. They demanded jewels, property, cash. His father entered the room wrapped in a slow curl of smoke, a cigarette between his fingers, a matchbox tucked into his palm as though it was an emblem of authority. He surveyed Mira from head to toe with a measuring gaze, then turned to his family, his silence heavy and deliberate. And there were no courtesies, no negotiations, only an air of assumed dominance. After a few strained minutes, he began to speak of himself. He spoke of having once worked in reputed firms, of fortunes lost to bankruptcy, to present unemployment that he described as merely temporary. He claimed to be awaiting government contract and a long promised settlement from former employers, narrating his circumstances as though destiny itself were preparing to restore him. And in his telling, he was a dignified patriarch, momentarily displaced by fate. Yet the truth lay bare beneath the performance. His declarations rang hollow, more theatrical than authentic. In reality, he was a self absorbed man who has failed to shoulder the responsibilities he so confidently proclaimed. Rajiv now, not his father, was a true pillar of the household. It was Rajiv who carried the weight of mounting debts and loans that ran into lakhs. From the age of 15, he had worked tirelessly, sacrificing his youth so that his family might at least have one meal a day. Behind the father's smoky bravado stood a quiet and acknowledged truth. The son had long since become the man of the house, said Rajiv. Rajiv stood watching, sometimes defending weakly, mostly silent. The ugliness was indigestible, yet Mira made a decision. She had a soft corner that would alter her life. Her own house was not peace. Her two sisters' arranged marriages collapsed into divorce and humiliation. Her two older brothers were circling her aging father, waiting to seize the property rather to take care of him at his old age in his retired age. Her father, Swami IAS, retired, though dignified, was emotionally shattered by repeated family fractures, and mother expired when she was 10. Mira felt like a burden. Marriage to Raju began to look like escape. Better the devil you know. She married him the year of rupture. Within 1 year, the illusion disintegrated. Raju's temper sharpened. His family's greed intensified. Arguments escalated into verbal abuse. One afternoon, when Mira returned from office, he was gone. Jewels gone, cash gone. He had absconded. Humiliation burned deeper than loss. The neighbors whispered, relatives speculated. She locked herself in a room and cried until her throat hurt. Suicide crossed her mind like a silent shadow, but then she thought of her older father. If I die, they will say his daughter failed. She chose survival. 3 months later, Rajiv returned, thin, dramatic, pleading, forgive me, I made a mistake. It's my blunder. I would be a dog at your foot lifelong. Please forgive and accept me. Against instinct, against logic, and she allowed him back. That decision cost another 3 years of her life, and she was dismantled and humiliated, destroyed to the core. The years of atrocity, what followed was not mere marital conflict, it was psychological warfare, daily accusations, financial control, isolation from support, humiliation, masked as joke. Her parents, his parents, and siblings interfered constantly, draining money, provoking disputes. Physical intimidation began, objects thrown, walls punched, doors slammed. He never left marks visible enough to prove, but emotional bruises accumulated invisibly. She lived among what she privately called blood-sucking vampires. Yet every evening she would visit her father, smile, serve him food on time, speak gently. She performed happiness. Swami, now aging, found joy only in routine and dignity. Of course, he smelled something wrong with her life, but he is helpless because Mira is quite firm, and she never listened to him when she was young. Is she going to listen to him at this age? Mira would not let him see her fracture. Misfortune, it seemed, had no regard for limits. One morning, however, hope arrived quietly. Mira received an appointment at a reputed school and was asked to assume charge immediately. And she was appointed, an English teacher for the standard 9, 10, 11, and 12. The salary offered was quite handsome in that, in that year. I could say 1998, 5,000 per month, and with private tuitions bringing an additional 2,000, our earnings would amount 7,000. A respectable income in the year. I could say 1998 to 2000. For the first time in a long while, she felt the strings of financial independence. But prosperity, however modest, threatened those who feared her growth. Her mother in law, determined to curtail Mira's raising autonomy, provoked a violent confrontation on the very day she was to begin her new job. In a rift of rage, she pulled Mira's hat, tore her sari, and created a humiliating spectacle. Rajiv had already left for work, shaken and frightened. Mira took an auto to his office barely 10 minutes away, narrated that harassment. With trembling resolve, she warned that she would lodge a police complaint. When Rajiv, along with a friend, managed to pacify her to avoid further escalation, they hurriedly searched for a new place to live. What they found was a single room, barely 300 square feet, with a common toilet and bathroom shared by five families, nearly 15 people in all. It was cramped, inconvenient, starkly modest, yet to Meera, it represented something invaluable: distance from abuse. Sometimes she believed something is better than nothing. Even then, dignity was not granted easily. Rajiv's mother refused to be part with the refrigerator, washing machine, stove, cot, swing, other essential household items which really belongs to Meera. Rajiv himself, instead of standing by her, coldly told Meera that if she wished to live with him, she must leave everything behind, otherwise, she was free to approach the police he claimed he was least bothered about. For the sake of her father's reputation and fragile health, Meera swallowed her anger. She walked out of the house with nothing but her education certificates and a single night dress. Rajiv's parent extended kindness, offering old utensils, modest furniture, and groceries to help them begin again. It was the third time she was forced to rebuild her life. The first had been after marriage, when she believed she had escaped the suffocating confines of her father's house, only to realize within a month that she had stepped into a harsher reality. In 1998, Rajiv had absconded, leaving her emotionally orphaned overnight. After a year of their marriage, during those early years, she had endured humiliation, harassment, profound trauma at the hands of his family. And when she married in 1997, Meera had brought with her 15 sovereigns of gold, 50,000 in cash, and a stable job. Within a year, Rajiv squandered all her jewelry and savings in reckless ventures, leaving her penniless and pauper. And 10 sovereigns that he had pledged to the bank were eventually redeemed by Swami, who assured Meera he would return them when she truly found stability and happiness. Instead, Rajiv's mother stripped her of every household possession and pushed her out as though she was a beggar. Once more, Meera relied solely on her education and her employment and her indomitable willpower and spirit. Within 2 months of moving into the cramped room, she got conceived. Her father became her pillar of strength, caring for her and later for her son Arjun, the grandkid of Mr. Swami, the Richard I. From the time he was in her womb until his own passing. And when Arjun was 5 years old, in those fragile years, Swami emerged as an unexpected guardian, living as on a pension of 20,000 per month. He provided them with a dignified life in a respectable apartment, ensuring rent, food, and Arjun's education were taken care of until his death in 2007. He stood as a quiet benefactor, restoring to Meera a measure of security, and she had long been denied. Thus, amid betrayal and loss, Meera learned a truth carved by suffering: when stripped of wealth, possessions, and protection, education and inner resolve become a woman's only unassailable inheritance. I repeat, Meera learned a truth carved by suffering. When stripped of wealth, possessions, and protection, education and inner resolve become a woman's only unassailable inheritance. The night the silence broke. The house was too quiet, not the quiet of peace, the quiet of something waiting to break. Meera stood in the kitchen, staring at the kettle long after it had begun to whistle. The shrill sound cut through the house like a warning no one wanted to hear. And 17 years ago, she had stood in another kitchen like this, pregnant with Ananya, waiting for Rajiv to return from the hospital. And she had imagined pregnant with Arjun. Yeah. She had imagined a marriage or partnership, then two heroes of different kinds, one who repaired bodies and one who repaired souls. But somewhere along the years, the repair had become one-sided. And she turned off the kettle and into the living room. Rajiv sat scrolling through his phone. His expression was calm, almost both the way surgeons often look before an operation, detached, clinical. Meera had studied that phase for 30 years. She now knew what it meant danger. The child who changed the climate. When her son was born, something shifted. Rajiv surprisingly softened at least externally. Perhaps father would sober him. Perhaps illness reminded him of mortality. For a while, responsibility flickered. Child became bridge and shield. At her 70s, Swami held his grandson with a tenderness he had never expressed before. In that small boy's laughter, he found redemption. Mira found purpose and she would survive for a child. After the father, when Swami died, the protective silence entered. The siblings she had protected emotionally turned predators and property disputes erupted, documents manipulated, signatures contested, and 5 crores worth of ancestral assets slipped through her hands into greedy control in the year 2007. Legal routes were exhausting and expensive and corrupt. She lost not because she was wrong, because she was alone. She moved to Bangalore seeking reinvention, the city of predators. Bangalore did not offer relief. Workplaces became new battlegrounds. Senior officials crossed boundaries. Colleagues spread rumors. Advances were disguised as mentorship. And when she resisted, harassment intensified. She filed complaints, ran from pillar to post, committees, legal notices, endless hearings. Justice was procedural, not protective. At 50, she had faced betrayal from husband, sibling, system, yet she stood bruised but unbroken. The loveless continuum, Rajiv remained volatile. His illness progressed slowly, but his control instincts remained strong. He resented her attempts at independence, and if she smiled, he questioned. If she succeeded, he undermined. And if she rested, he provoked. He could not allow her happiness. Control was his oxygen. And their marriage became coexistence, not partnership, not love. And just endurance, millennial style, not silent in 1960, but trapped by complexity. The son who chose differently. Their son grew up witnessing chaos, arguments, tension, instability. Childhood was not gentle. A trauma did not consume him. Perhaps witnessing pain taught him empathy. As an adult, he became measured, respectful, protective. He chose not to repeat his father. He cared for both parents, not blindly but consciously. He forgave what he could and he prioritized dignity. In him, the generational arc bent slightly toward healing. Psychological truth of the millennial marriage: love mistaken for intensity, choice mistaken for empowerment, trauma mistaken for destiny, and survival mistaken for strength. Meera did not endure like Nayagi, her mother. She fought, but fighting did not guarantee fairness. She chose marriage as escape. It became entrapment. Unlike her mother's generation, she saw the injustice clearly, and clarity is the beginning of generational range. And Meera, the climax, we can see the confrontation, the long tolerance. And naming the monster, by the time Meera turned 48, she had learned vocabulary that her mother never had: gaslighting, narcissistic abuse, trauma bonding, coercive control. I repeat, gaslighting, narcissistic abuse, trauma bonding, and coercive control. Raju was not merely flawed, he was structured around dominance. His childhood had been brutal: poverty, humiliation, mother who weaponized guilt, a father who oscillated between absence and rage. Love in the house was transactional, survival meant manipulation. Rajiv learned early: control prevents abandonment. His neuromuscular dystrophy deepened his insecurity, physical vulnerability collided with the masculine ego. He compensated with psychological power. Meera slowly understood this. Understanding did not free her, but it stopped her from blaming herself. The breaking evidence: the workplace harassment in Bangalore reached a tipping point. A senior executive attempted to corner her in a meeting room. Few hours she recorded the conversation. For the first time in her life, she collected proof. When she filed a complaint under workplace harassment law, retaliation followed immediately. Performance reviews downgraded, rumors circulated. Rajiv did not support her. Instead, he said, "Why invite trouble? Stay quiet." That was the moment she saw clearly. He did not want her empowered, he wanted her dependent. She filed the case anyway. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and indifference. An opposing counsel tried character assassination. Why did she continue working if uncomfortable? Why no earlier complaint? Is this financially motivated? Honey trap, Mira answered calmly, because she had survived worse. The family litigation simultaneously, she reopened property litigation against her siblings. A 5 crore loss through manipulation still burnt inside her, forgery allegations, suppressed wills, and questionable transfers, legal battles dragged for years. Her siblings portrayed her as unstable, greedy, vindictive. Raju ironically sided with them, quietly hoping her defeat would shrink her further. But this time she did not collapse. She studied documents herself, consulted ethical lawyers, sat through hearing without trembling. Court became therapy. Each testimony forced her to speak truth publicly, something her mother never did. A partial relief came, not full property restoration, but legal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Sometimes justice is not recovery, it is validation. She is waiting for the day that we could get her justice. The nurses unmasked at home. Rajiv intensified manipulation, silent treatment, sudden rage, victim theoretics, and classic narcissistic cycle. Idealize, devalue, discard, hover back. Mira stopped reacting. That unsettled him more than confrontation. When he accused her of betrayal, she responded with a matured silence. And when he provoked, she disengaged. She learned grey rock before she knew the term. Why did she stay? Not because she loved him blindly, not because she feared society, she stayed for her son Arjun. Her son, who had seen enough instability. If she initiated divorce during his formative years, custody battles, character attacks, and financial chaos would have consumed him, and she could be the stabilizing parent. She observed the fire, and so he could grow in relative shade. Though she calls herself as a single mother, for her son's sake, she lived with her estranged husband Rajiv under the same roof for the sake of her son Arjun. The son's awareness, children of conflict, grow perspective. Her son understood more than she realized. He saw the imbalance, he saw her restraint, he saw his father's volatility. And when he turned 25, he told her quietly, Amma, I know you stayed for me. She did not cry, she felt seen. He chose not to replicate his father. He pursued education, built career, treated relationship with deliberation. Trauma can transit, but it can also transform. Tragedy or transformation. At 50, Meera is not conventionally victorious. She did not win full property. She did not leave the marriage. She did not receive cinematic justice. Rajiv remains difficult, aging, insecure, intermittently cruel. But something fundamental change. She no longer believes his narrative, that is freedom. She earns her own income. She started her own academy and she was running it as a sole proprietor. She maintains boundaries, documents everything. She supports her son's independence and she stays, but not as victim. She stays as strategist, as tolerance is no longer unconscious suffering, it is conscious calculation. When a son becomes fully settled, financially independent, emotionally secure, she knows she will have options. For the first time in decades, the future is not a cage, it is a door. The psychological analysis, why she endured trauma bonding, cycles of abuse mixed with intermittent affection create addictive attachment. Family responsibility, conditioning, raised to protect her father's dignity, she internalized silence as virtue. Social complexity of divorce in 2000 India, though possible, divorce still carried stigma, prolonged legal warfare. She doesn't want to face it. Financial strategy, leaving prematurely would have handed Rajiv victim leverage. And maternal prioritization, her son's stability overweight her personal relief. This is not weakness, it is a generational burden. Redemption did not arrive as romance, it arrived as self respect. She began therapy privately. She resumed music softly at night. She reconnected with her body through yoga. She cultivated friendship independent of marriage. Unlike Nayagi, her art did not die, it passed and returned. Final reflection, the millennial marriage. Boomers endured silently, millennials endured consciously. Mira's tragedy was betrayal. Her redemption is awareness, her transformation is raising a son who breaks the cycle. Raju may remain narcissistic, but he no longer defines a narrative, and that is the quiet revolution of a generation. The morning after the storm, morning arrived without ceremony, no bird song, no gentle sunlight spilling through the curtains, only a pale grey light that crept slowly into the house like an uncertain guest. After a storm, silence always felt heavier. Mira woke before dawn. She had barely slept. The night had been full of restless dreams, fragments of faces moving across decades. Her mother, Naigi, sitting quietly beside a window, sewing the same torn sari again and again. Her father, Swami, whose voice once filled the house like thunder, whose loneliness she had only understood many years later. And now Rajiv, the strange inheritance of men who believed strength meant never showing their wounds. As she walked to the balcony with a journal and a cup of tea, for 30 years, she had been a psychologist to strangers, listening to their broken stories, helping them untangle childhood pain. Yet, the most complicated case had always lived inside her own home. She opened the journal, her pen moved slowly. Trauma is not only what happens to us, it is what we carry silently into the lives of those we love. She paused. A realization surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. Rajiv had never truly been her enemy, and he had been a wounded boy disguised as a powerful man. And she had spent decades trying to heal him without his permission. No therapy works that way. She closed the journal. Perhaps the work of healing had never been hers alone. And next, Rajiv had not slept at all. He sat in the living room where the confrontation had happened. The same table, the same chair, but something had shifted in the air as if the house itself had heard. Truth it could not forget. He poured himself coffee through he rarely drank it at home. Hospitals were easier places for him. In hospitals, pain had structure. A body breaks, a surgeon repairs, and clean, predictable. But emotional pain was chaotic. Last night, Mira had spoken words he had never allowed himself to hear. The helpless boy you once were. The sentence has followed him into the night like an echo. He remembered his father, a strict military man who believed softness was weakness. Rajiv had been 12 when he first heard the sentence that shaped his life. Men do not complain. His father had said that it to Rajiv, fell from his bicycle and cried. The memory felt strangely vivid now and suddenly realized something disturbing. He had spent his entire life proving he was not that crying boy, not weak, not vulnerable, so he became exceptional. Top and the control, and so he became exceptional, and control always, the last night he looked at her, his son looked at him with unsettling clarity. And you are just a man who never learned how to feel. The words stung because they were true. He rubbed his temples for the first time in years. He felt something unfamiliar, not anger, not pride, and something quieter, and the shame. The house that looked intact, the interlude, part two. The house that looked intact. Between what is broken and what is healed, there is a long season of pretending. Part two begins there. The house is still standing. Meals are cooked. Festivals are observed. Relatives visit only with polite satisfaction. From the outside, nothing appears fractured inside. However, the architectural has shifted. Silence grows thicker. Words sharpen. Dreams shrink quietly. Mira, now no longer a girl and not yet fully awakened, moves through the rooms that feel familiar but no longer safe. She has learned the choreography of survival, speak softly, anticipate anger, avoid confrontation, absorb emotional weather. Rajiv too is changing. His early charm had hardened into vigilance. The world outside did not crown him as he once imagined. Promotions were slower, recognition thinner, his private disappointments ferment into control. He does not wake each morning planning cruelty. He wakes fearing irrelevance. The fear when unexamined becomes a domination. Meanwhile, the ghost of Swami's authority lingers in Mira's mind. The idea that masculinity must be obeyed to maintain order. Naga's endurance lives in her muscles, the reflex to hold pain quietly so children remain undisturbed. The part two is not loud tragedy, it is accumulation, small humiliation, small reconciliation, small resignations, a property signed away in trust, jewels sold in preservation, dreams postponed for now. Meera tells herself she is choosing stability, but stability built on suppression becomes erosion. And yet, in the midst of this erosion, something unexpected grows, that is the observation. She begins to notice patterns, the way anger arrives predictably after professional failure, the way apology arrives only when abandonment threatens, the way love is offered conditionally but longed for unconditionally. Part 2 is a slow awakening, not rebellion, recognition like a crack in a wall that first appears as a hairline barely visible until light begins slipping through. By the end of this part, Mira is no longer only enduring, she is watching, and watching is the first fracture in repetition. Now we are moving to part 3, the unresolved emotional trauma by VMS, the year 2026, Arjun, Mera's son. Love in the age of awareness, the boy who lost his world. Arjun was 5 when his grandfather died. To the world, it was passing of a retired officer. To Arjun, it was a disappearance of warmth. His grandfather had been his constant, the one steady presence in a house where voices rose like storms. Old man's lap was safety. His stories were rhythm. His laughter softened the sharpness of his parents' arguments, and then suddenly silence. In the same season, Arjun lost his favorite teddy bear, his grandfather, the one that had slept beside him since birth. It was misplaced during a house shift, gone with the wind. Two losses, one emotional, one symbolic. The child does not differentiate. Security vanished. The new house in a new city felt alien. In Bangalore, the walls did not know his name. His parents' fights did not stop. If anything, they grew sharper without the grandfather's stabilizing presence. Arjun learned early love can disappear, homes can shift, nothing stays. He began to fear the future, not because of failure, but because of the abandonment. Escape through puppy love. In his teenage years, while he was in the 11th grade, Arjun found a refuge in attention. A classmate smiled at him. For a boy raised in emotional unpredictability, affection felt revolutionary. He mistook intensity for destiny. At 17, he declared he would leave home after 12th grade and live independently, perhaps even with her. His puppy love. It was not rebellion, it was survival instinct. A love at home was unstable. He would build his own, yet reality intervened. And arguments with his girlfriend mirrored his parents' patterns. Insecurity, overreaction, miscommunication. For the first time, Arjun saw reputation. He stepped back, focused on studies, entered college, began to understand something powerful. Running from pain does not heal it. And the next chapter, the breakup that built him at when he was 19, just as his second year, the breakup happened, and at 20, just as his career began, the teenage relationship ended completely. The breakup did not destroy him; it matured him. He saw how much he had depended on romance to fill emotional gaps left by family dysfunction. He began observing instead of reacting. Therapy entered his life quietly. Unlike his parents' generation, he did not see it as weakness. He confronted his fear and he confronted his anger at his parents, and slowly some things shifted. He stopped blaming them. He saw them as damaged humans, not villains. The best friend who stayed during college, there was someone constant, his classmate. The day when he met her, they became more like buddies, I could say. The bestie, his travel companion, his debate partner. 7 years of friendship, trips, group studies, family stories exchanged without pretense. And she saw his scars, he saw her ambitions. Love did not erupt dramatically, it unfolded. But Arjun carried a hidden pattern, fear of missing out, fear of settling, fear of choosing wrong. Though he knew she was steady and kind, part of him wondered. And though they were classmates, she is 1 year older than him. Arjun seems to be the youngest in the class because he is premature. And not only that, most of his classmates are 1 year older than though they are the same class. Though he knew she was steady, the kind, part of him wondered, do I deserve more? And this is the paradox of Gen Z. And they are self aware but also perpetually doubtful. Before fully committing, he briefly slipped into another attraction, too fast, too impulsive, a subconscious attempt to escape vulnerability. Corrected himself, returned to clarity, chose consciously this time, not out of fear but by alignment. When love entered the house, she entered the house first as best friend. Meera observed quietly. She had lived through deception and she could read energy. The glances were longer, silence warmer. One evening she asked simply, is she more than a friend? Arjun did not deny it. Meera was not shocked. It was reflective. It was not 1960, it was not 2000, and it is 2026. They decided to marry in 2 years, not immediately, not impulsively, planned, practical, discussed. The mother who let go, Meera, being the mother of Arjun, this phase felt like death in slow motion. Her son had been reason to endure. She had survived humiliation, betrayal, harassment, sacrificed, all anchored by motherhood. Now he would build his own world. The emptiness syndrome. She would no longer be central. She smiled outwardly. Inside, she grieved. Since childhood, she had accepted fate repeatedly, first for her father's dignity, then for her husband's instability, now for her son's independence. She had never fully lived for herself. Even in her 50s, attention still followed her. Men admired her resilience, her intelligence, her quiet beauty, but she never passed anyone. Not because she lacked desire, but because she never met the man who matched her inner ideal. Strength like her father's intellect, dignity, masculinity balanced with integrity. She had once wanted a man like her father, an officer, intelligent, decisive. Instead, life had thrown her into darkness, so she poured her remaining dreams into her son's future. A different man, Arjun grew into what neither grandfather nor father fully managed to become: firm but gentle, ambitious but emotionally articulate, protective but not controlling. He did not romanticize toxicity, he did not tolerate manipulation, he prioritized his parents despite the chaos. That was his rebellion, not abandonment. Forgiveness in a generation often accused of self centeredness, Arjun chose responsibility not because he was weak but because he understood fragility. He saw some Gen Z relationships collapsing under ego disguised as equality, partners competing instead of collaborating, dominance reframed as empowerment. He was conscious. He was cautious. He sought partnership, not performance. A quiet after the storm. Life did not change suddenly after Red June's marriage. It changed gradually the way seasons change in a long summer, almost unnoticed until one day the air feels different. The house that had once echoed with arguments now lived in an unfamiliar calm. Rajiv had grown quieter with age. The sharp impatience that once defined him had softened into tired resignation. His steps had slowed. His voice no longer carried the authority of anger. Mira noticed a transformation without commenting on it. People rarely change because they wish to become better. They change because time slowly takes away the energy required to remain the same. In those quieter years, Mira began waking earlier than before. Dawn became her companion. She would sit at the veranda with a cup of tea, watching the city awaken gradual layers of sound. Milk vendors calling out, temple bells ringing somewhere in the distance, the first bus passing through the streets. And there was peace in those mornings, not the happiness she once imagined life would bring, but something deeper, a sense that she had survived enough years to finally absorb life instead of constantly struggling with it. Ananya's world, Arjun's wife. Ananya belonged to a generation that believed in designing life rather than inheriting. She spoke confidently about career strategies, international opportunities, financial planning. Her world moved quickly, meetings, deadlines, flights between cities. She treated marriage the same way she treated a profession, as a partnership built on negotiation and practical understanding. Cooking, she once told Mira with a disarming honesty, felt like a punishment. I don't understand why women still romanticize the kitchen, she had said one evening. Mira had smiled gently, for her cooking had never been a prison and it had been a language. The way she fed her father after her mother's death, the way she cared for her son during his fragile childhood, the way she held her own mind together during years when life threatened to break it apart, as a therapy. But Mira did not argue with Ananya. Every generation creates its own definitions of love and labor. Instead, she simply said, find you what nourishes your life. Ananya had nodded. And though they came from different emotional worlds, a quieter respect began growing between them, the birth of the twins. When Ananya announced a pregnancy, entire family entered a new emotional landscape. Even Rajiv seemed transformed by the news. He spoke more softly, not more easily. Perhaps the promise of a new life allowed him to briefly forget the regret that had followed him through middle age. And the twins arrived on a monsoon morning. Ayan first, and then Aradhya. Two small beings entered the world with the fierce determination that all newborns carry. When Mira held them for the first time, she felt a sensation she had not experienced in decades. A hope, not the anxious hope of youth that expects life to deliver happiness, but a calmer hope, the understanding that every new generation receives another chance to interpret the human story differently. The hospital room buzzed with excitement. Arjun moved carefully around the babies, both fascinated, terrified by their fragility. Ananya and exhausted yet radiant, and watched him with amused affection. And Mira, standing quietly near the window, felt the invisible presence of another memory, her father, Swami, holding her son for the first time, the circle continuing. The generational shift. Boomer marriage, survival, millennial marriage, struggle, Gen Z marriage, negotiation with the self. Arjun does not marry to escape, he does not marry to prove, he marries to share. And Meera, watching him, feel something unfamiliar. Not fear, relief, the generational trauma has thinned, not vanished but softened. Meera's final realization, for decades she believed she never lived her life, but perhaps she did differently. Her father gave integrity, her husband gave adversity, her son gave healing, and healing is also alive. Closing reflection, three generations, a man who sacrificed love for duty, a woman who sacrificed peace for endurance, son who chooses awareness over reputation, and marriage evolves, pain transforms. And sometimes that greatest redemption is not personal happiness, but breaking the pattern for the next generation. Ananya, across the house, Ananya lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She had replayed the argument 100 times in her mind, part of her full triumph, and she had spoken her truth. Gen Z had been raised to believe silence was the enemy. Speak up, challenge authority, break toxic patterns. It's something about the night disturbed her. Her father's face at the end, not angry, lost, and she had never seen the expression before. She opened her phone, scrolling mindlessly through messages from friends, memes, relationship debates, and political sarcasm. A generation and language for everything, trauma, boundaries, and gaslighting. But understanding something intellectually was different from living inside its consequences. She realized something uncomfortable. For years. She had viewed her parents as symbol, her father, patriarchy, mother, endurance. But last night she had glimpsed something else, two imperfect human beings trapped inside roles they had never consciously chosen. They sat up slowly. Maybe the world wasn't divided as neatly as a generation believed. Maybe healing required more than simply naming the problem. And next at breakfast at 8 o'clock, they met in the kitchen. A quiet choreography unfolded. Meera poured tea. Rajiv read the newspaper without turning a page. And she was, Ananya, their daughter-in-law, leaned against the counter pretending to check a phone. Three people in the same room, three separate emotional universes. Finally, Meera spoke. Ananya, how about your life? Yes, we'll go. And Ananya hesitated. Yes, Rajiv looked up slightly but said something. The silence stretched, and then unexpectedly Rajiv spoke. You know, with curiosity for his family. Curiosity was not territory. The conversation hung delicately between them, not agreement. Meera's realization later that afternoon, Meera sat in her clinic office, her next patient cancelled, leaving her alone with the hour of unexpected silence. She reflected on the strange evolution of the morning. No apologies, no dramatic reconciliation. Something had undeniably shifted. The house felt different, less rigid, more uncertain. Uncertainty, she knew as a psychologist, was often the first step toward change. She remembered her mother again. Nagi survived life through quiet endurance. Meera had tried to transform suffering through understanding. And now Ananya's generation demanded confrontation. Three strategies across three generations, perhaps none of them would entirely right or entirely wrong. Healing, she realized, was not a silent moment, and it was a long conversation between the past and the future. And Rajiv's decision that evening, Rajiv stood out a Meera clinic door, and he had never visited a workplace before. Hospitals were his territory, and therapy rooms felt strangely foreign. He hesitated before knocking. When Meera opened the door, surprise flickered her across face. Rajiv, he looked uncomfortable. Do you have time? She gestured inside. Of course, he sat down in the patient chair, an unusual role reversal. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he spoke. Last night, you said something. Meera waited. You said I never learned how to feel. He swallowed slightly. Is that something people can learn? The question hung in the quiet room, not defensive, not sarcastic, just honest. Meera looked at him quietly, and yes, Rajiv exhaled slowly. Good, he passed. Because I think I should. The beginning. That night, Meera wrote another journal entry. temporary. Healing does not arrive like lightning. It arrives like morning light, slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed. She closed the notebook and looked out the window. In another part of the city, Ananya was laughing with her no friends, already turning the previous night into a story. Rajiv sat alone, reading that emotional intelligence on his laptop, feeling slightly ridiculous but strangely determined. Three generations continuing their journey. The past had not disappeared, future had opened a small door, and sometime Mira thought a small door is all life needs to begin again. The quiet revolution time did not transform life with thunder, it worked like water, drop by drop, year by year, softening even the hardest stone. For most of her life, Mira had been surviving. Now at 50, something unfamiliar began to unfold within her, and she was no longer merely surviving, she was witnessing. The age of seeing, there comes a peculiar age in a woman's life, not youth, not old age, but a middle horizon where the illusions of the world are quietly being to dissolve. At 50, Mira discovered she could see life with a strange clarity, not with anger, not even with forgiveness, but with understanding. She began noticing patterns not only in her patients, in generations, in families, in marriages that repeated the same wounds like inherited heirlooms. She saw them everywhere in a clinic, young women crying about a controlling husband, a man struggling with emotional emptiness he could not name, a daughter angry with her mother, and every story felt painfully familiar. Different faces, same pain. It dawned on Mira slowly. Human beings believed they were living unique lives, yet most of them were simply repeating unfinished stories of their ancestors. The shadow of Naigi, her mother. One evening, Mira opened an old wooden trunk inside where her mother Naigi's belongings, a folded silk saris, a rusted jewelry box, and old photographs yellowed with time. She held a photograph of Naigi. The image showed a young woman standing outside a large government bungalow, five children surrounding her, a faint smile. But Mira now noticed something she had never seen as a child. The eyes, beautiful but tired. Naigi had lived in abundance, a large house, status, respected husband, yet her life had slowly narrowed into illness and endurance. Asthma weakened her body, but perhaps something else had weakened her spirit. A woman who had once dreamt of independence had eventually lived within invisible walls, not because she lacked strength, but because her world had not allowed another script. Meera whispered softly to the photograph, Amma, you did the best you could, and for the first time in 50 years, she felt no resentment, only compassion. The enigma asked Swami, her thoughts turned to her father, Swami, the retired IAS, has been a man admired by the world, an IAS officer, commanding presence, sharp intellect. Yet at home, he had been a storm, his anger filled rooms with a sudden monsoon. And years, Mira believed he had destroyed Noige's happiness, but adulthood complicated the story, and she now understood the suffocation of authority, burden of public power, loneliness of men who were expected to be pillars but never allowed to crumble. And Swami had carried the weight of nations' bureaucracy during the day, at night, and he had returned to home where emotional language simply did not exist. His secret affair, woman in West Mambalam, and Lakshmi auntie, had once confused Meera deeply, and now she understood it differently. It had not been betrayal, it has been a kind of escape for men. Two lonely adults meeting briefly in small rented house. Both are widow and widower, sharing laughter, sharing warmth, and enjoying their companionship. A kind of relationship in order to endure, perhaps sharing a version of themselves world had never seen. Life, Mira realized, was rarely divided into villains and saints. Most people were simply wounded travelers trying to breathe. And Rajiv, if Naigi represented endurance and Swami represented suppressed power, Rajiv represented another form of human tragedy, a man shaped by shame. Rajiv had grown up in poverty despite belonging to a Brahmin family that once carried prestige, debt collectors shouting outside the house, parents borrowing endlessly, and father chain smoker, drunkard, and mother, she was supposed to be a kind of third grade. The humiliation of financial collapse, and in the chaos, Rajiv had learned a dangerous lesson. Siblings are highly criminal and self centered. Control is survival. He had tried to control everything, money, marriage, reputation, even Mira's mind. But control had not given him peace, and it had only deepened his loneliness. For years, Mira believed Rajiv destroyed her life. At 50, she realized something unsettling. Rajiv had not destroyed her life. It is her own choice. He had simply revealed her strength. Pain had just shaped her into a psychologist. Suffering had forced her into spiritual inquiry. Her darkest years had become the foundation of her deepest wisdom. Life has an ironic way of doing that. The mirror named Ananya. Then came Ananya, a new generation, brilliant, educated, independent, a woman who believed marriage should never imprison her identity. Meera initially felt disturbed by Ananya's bluntness, her refusal to cook, her dismissal of traditional expectation, but slowly Meera began to see something else. Ananya was not rejecting family, she was rejecting sacrifice without a choice. Her generation had watched their mothers suffer silently, and they had grown determined never to repeat that pattern, yet they carried their own blind spots. And freedom without responsibility could become another form of selfishness. Every generation believed it had resolved the problems of the past, but life, like a boomerang, always returned their new lessons. The kitchen one evening, Meera stood alone in a kitchen. Cooking had always been a sanctuary, and from the day she had been 10 years old and cooked rice and dal for a lonely father, for the first time to the year she prepared meals for her son, and food had never been the labor for her. It had been love made visible, and the only way to reach and satisfy the stomach as well as the mind of her beloved. She stirred the pot slowly. Suddenly, she imagined three women standing beside her: Nayagi, her mother; Meera herself; Ananya, her daughter-in-law. Three generation, three relationship with the same kitchen. For Nayagi, it had been duty. For Meera, it had been therapy. For Ananya, it was a prison she refused to enter. And perhaps none of them were entirely wrong. Meera smiled gently. The kitchen itself had been the problem. The problem was when love became obligation instead of choice. The philosophy of midlife. At 50, Meera discovered strange liberation. She no longer needed the world to approve her life. She no longer needed to fix Rajiv. She no longer needed her son Arjun to fulfill her dreams. Life had moved beyond those expectations. Instead, she began teaching not just psychology but something deeper: art of observing life without being destroyed by it. Her students often asked, Madam, what is the meaning of life? Meera would smile, there is not one. They looked confused. Then she explained, life is not a problem to solve, it is an experience to understand. The quiet transformation. Rajiv had slowly began therapy. Ananya continued challenging family traditions. Arjun balanced love and responsibility. In his own quiet way, life did not suddenly become perfect. There were still arguments, still misunderstanding. Something fundamental changed in Meera. She no longer saw herself as a victim. She saw herself as a bridge between generations. Behind her stood Nayagi and Swami. Before her stood Arjuna and Ananya. And beyond them a future she would never fully see, the twins, her grandkids. The realization one night, standing beneath a silent sky, Meera understood something profound. Every generation believed it was different. Boomers endured, millennials analyzed, Gen Z confronted. But the human heart remained the same. It longed for love, it feared loneliness, it struggled to balance freedom and belonging. The language changed, the pain remained, and perhaps the beauty of life was not in solving this puzzle, but in learning to live with its contradiction. Learning to live with contradiction. Mira closed her eyes for the first time in decades. Her mind felt light, not because life had become easier, but because she had stopped trying to control its meaning. The revolution within her was quite invisible to the world, but profound. She had finally discovered the rarest form of freedom and the inner peace. The boomerang of time. 75 years is a long time to live, long enough to see dreams rise and collapse, long enough to bury parents, forgive in enemies, and outgrow the people who once defined your world. But more than anything, it is long enough to recognize the patterns. By the time Mira turned 75, she no longer tried to understand life, she simply observed it quietly, like a river watching the sky. The house of echoes, the house had grown strangely peaceful. Rajiv moved slowly now. Age had softened his one sharp arrogance. Illness had done what arguments never could. Their conversations were no longer battles, and they had become small, careful exchanges, like strangers sharing a waiting room. Sometimes Mira wondered whether time had finally defeated the ego that once ruled him, or whether age had simply exhausted. Either way, the war was over, and not because anyone won, but because both soldiers were tired. The return of childhood every evening, two energetic voices filled the house. Her grandchildren and twin children, Ayan and Aradhya, 17 years old now. Arjun and Ananya's children, the boy and girl, Ayan and Aradhya, and they were unlike the generation before them, confident, fearless, questioning everything. Sometimes Meera would sit quietly watching them argue about philosophy, technology, politics, climate change. Their world was vastly different. Artificial intelligence, global travel, endless digital connections. Yet something about them felt strangely familiar, and their laughter echoed the same innocence Meera once saw in Arjun when he was a child clutching his teddy bear. Life had moved forward, but human emotions had not evolved as dramatically as technology. Arjun and Ananya had been married for nearly 20 years now. They had built a modern life, separate careers, shared finances, independent choices. They still lived separately from Meera just as they planned long ago. But they visited often, time had matured them. Ananya had become successful in her corporate world. She still disliked cooking, yet life had quietly adjusted her perspective. Health problems, PCOD, lactose intolerance eventually forced her to learn a few simple meals. Ironically, she now cooked occasionally for her children, not as duty but as care. Arjuna remained what he always was, a gentle, patient man who believed relationships required effort more than victory. Watching him, Mira often thought of her father. Swami's dignity had returned in another room. The silent realization one evening, Mira overheard an argument between Ayan and Aradhya. The twins were discussing marriage, and Aradhya declared confidently, I will never sacrifice my freedom for a man. Ayan replied calmly, and I will never marry someone who sees love as sacrifice. Their debate continued with intensity. Mira smiled. She had heard similar conversations before, different words, different decades, but the same struggle, freedom versus commitment, individual identity versus a shared life. Boomers had endured it silently, millennials had analyzed it painfully, Gen Z had rebelled against it, and now Gen Beta was intellectualizing it. The long view of time, 17 years passed faster than anyone expected. Ayan grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's patience, and Aradhya carried her mother's sharp intelligence and curiosity. Their conversation often filled the house with the new ideas. It is about artificial intelligence, global politics, mental health awareness. Listening to them sometimes felt like peering into the future that belonged entirely to them. Yet occasionally, Mira heard echoes of the past within their questions. Why do people stay in unhappy marriages? And Aradhya once asked during dinner. No one answered immediately. Finally, Mira spoke. Sometimes people stay because they are afraid to leave. Sometimes they stay because leaving would hurt others more. And sometimes they stay because they believe love might return one day. And Ayan considered this quietly. Did it return? He asked. Mira looked toward Rajiv, who was sitting silently across the table, now 80. For a moment, she thought carefully about the answer. Like changes people, she said at last, and sometimes that change becomes its own form of love. The boomerang of life one evening as the sun lowered slowly beyond the city skyline, Mira sat alone in the veranda, and the garden had grown wild over the years. Trees planted decades earlier now stretched high into the sky. Arjun and Ananya had come for dinner with the twins. Their voices drifted through the house, laughter, occasional debate, the easy familiarity of the family life. Mira watched the sunset quietly. In that fading light, she could see the entire map of her life. Her mother, Nagi, moving gently through the kitchen of a government bungalow. Her father, Swami, sitting at his desk, surrounded by files and responsibility, and the securities, watchmen, and servants and people around. Her own younger self running through confusion, heartbreak, trying desperately to build a stable life from unstable circumstances. And now this moment, and four generations connected by invisible emotional thread. For many years, Mira had tried to understand whether life followed any real pattern, whether suffering carried meaning, whether love could truly survive disappointment. But age had given her a simple understanding. Life did not move forward in perfect lines. It moved like a boomerang, thrown by one generation, caught by the next, and then thrown again toward the future. also. Each generation carried fragments of the previous one, its hopes, its wounds, and its unanswered questions. Unresolved traumatic, unresolved emotional traumas. And each question also added something new, a different courage, different perspective, different chance to learn what love required as the sky darkened. And the twins came running into the garden party. Come see this, they called. Mira stood slowly. Her body was older now, but her mind felt strangely light. And she walked toward them. Behind her, the long journey of her life rested quietly in memory. Head of her, another generation waited to write its own story, and somewhere between two horizons, Mira finally understood the deepest truth of human existence. Life does not ask us to perfect the past. It only asks us to continue the story with greater awareness. Unresolved emotional traumas would continue, and it travels silently across generation, and it only asks us to continue the story with greater awareness. The house of returning memories in old age houses began to speak, not with voice but with echoes. And afternoon, while dusting an old and wooden cupboard, Mira found a small brass container wrapped in faded cloth. Inside, objects that had quietly survived the decades. Her mother Naiga's silver hat pin, a photograph for the Swami standing beside government car, his posture straight, his face carrying the calm authority, and the man who believed his discipline, and a small music notebook filled with Naiga's handwriting. Pages smelled faintly of sandalwood and thyme. Mira turned them slowly, and she could almost hear her mother's voice singing slowly in the kitchen while cooking for five restless children. Naige had once been an artist, a dancer, singer, woman who loved beauty, but life had slowly redirected her talents. The quiet responsibilities of family asthma stolen her strength. Marriage absorbed her and ate into her. Mother had stopped loving music, and she simply learned. And Mira closed the notebook gently. Along with her, she closed her eyes too. For the first time, the children, Arjun and Ananya and the grandkids, realized that every person need to move away from this world. And Mira not only closed her notebook, even she closed her eyes once for all. Family had learned something, some new version of the same silent song. And Rajiv, sitting next to Mira, never cried, no tears, just holding her hand. And he was holding his breath, counting his days to go with Mira once for all. Unresolved Emotional Trauma by VMS.